what was put in the 1600s was a complete and total takeover of the royal houses and the destruction of the noble houses that could have gotten away over, the last 400 years. And these families are owned and controlled. Why? Because they have the last solid title to the lands and the assets of the lands that the financialists want to use for their systems. You have to have somebody that has legitimate title, but you have to own and control every minute of their life. And every once in a while, you got to kill some of them.
Yes.
Or outright abuse them that they can never say anything about. Our elites are owned and controlled. Kinds of trouble and conflicts and stuff that happens in their families fueled by the people who own them to keep them in check and control, keep them in a constant state of anger and fear. People need to understand we have all these nice things. What still drives the world is murder. What still controls the world is murder right here at home, in our halls, our families, our communities at every level. And the ones that are in the worst danger of murder aren't the poor people in the poor communities with crime. It's the upper class families. Heaven forbid one of them should ever turn against the system or the regime. How many Kennedys were killed? But the oligarchs are in all-out war right now. I mean, unmitigated, no backing out. It is winner take all.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history. And let's make war history. Hi, EM. Good to be with you again.
You as well, Rich.
Yeah, we've done a video with Alex, and I think Graham Moore, and I think you and me. This is now the second time.
I think so. Might be the third. Yeah,
maybe the third. I don't know, but it's all good. It's all good. Love talking to you. And you suggested having a slightly different conversation. One about how our own personal history shapes how we are now.
Yeah. Trauma. What does trauma do to shape a person, either to break them or to make of them something that can contribute?
Yeah. Okay, and it's kind of curious and puzzling because I work as a child protection social worker, and of course I've had my own traumas. Yeah. But why do you think that's sort of relevant and pertinent?
We have all these conversations about these very, very high level things, in my case, going back hundreds of years, the sport of kings, the great game, the eternal war, the infinite game. We talk about finance. We talk about alternative financial systems. We talk about all these complex things. Rarely do we ever talk about human beings and what human beings are individually going through. And were I someone who's trying to improve my understanding of how the world works, I might want to know that some of the people that are having these high-level conversations actually see me. I don't mean me personally, right? But I mean, if we're going to impact this oligarch system transition, we have to make sure that the human stays as the pinnacle of what that system should be pursuing is humanism.
Right.
And to do that, these oligarchs that are transitioning need to know that they've got a good substantive number of the people behind them. And in order for the people to get behind them, they need to know that at least us who are, have some voice out there and who are having these conversations, that we see them. We understand. Maybe even some of us have been through some of our own really difficult things that help shape us into who we are.
Okay, yeah. And I think there's something about being responsible for what's happened to us. And that's distinct from being at blame.
Yes.
There are things that have happened to me as a kid, things that I'm sure that have happened to you as a kid, things that, things happen to us as kids.
Yeah.
And that somehow we got to take ownership of those events, but without blaming ourselves, which I think happens too often.
Yeah. I mean, blaming is one part of it. The other part is falling into the victimhood mindset. And those are maybe somewhat slightly different. I think at some point, I don't think I know personally from my own early life that at a certain point, you're responsible for who and what you are, not something that happened when you were a child.
Yeah.
And even if you've put yourself repetitively into the situation where that particular type of abuse and trauma continues, you're still responsible for that. At a certain point, and I think this is one of the big problems we have in modern society is we don't have manhood and womanhood rituals anymore, so that we know there's a clear distinction of, okay, from here forward, you're responsible for you as an adult.
Yeah, Ian, I'm going to suggest something, right?
Yeah.
At the risk of offending you, I mean well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But one of the things I haven't told you, as well as social work, I do a lot of voluntary work, and I've done a lot of work in the personal development arena. So just say what you said again, but use the personal pronoun.
I
Try
don't
it.
think I quite understand the question.
So you said that you're responsible for how we react to things. I'm saying
I
I'm
see.
responsible. So try saying I'm responsible for how I
Yeah,
respond.
well, so I'm not sure this is a counseling session, but I am responsible. And I realized when I was very young, because I had no other choice, I had to raise myself and my brother from the time I was a little kid, my younger brother. So at a very early age, I realized I'm responsible. Now, I'm not responsible for all this other stuff that's happening. I have nothing to do, F all that I can do about that. But how I respond to it and how I make it through the day, I am responsible for. And I've always held that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my kid brother didn't. He got to drugs early, got into prison for violence very early, and was dead before he was 21 because he couldn't take responsibility for what was going on. He couldn't. And to be quite frank, the whole system and regime, even then, he was killed in 91, and all this started in the late 70s. Even back in the late 70s, the whole nanny state was already starting to develop. And the whole, concepts and ideas about, well, it's all your parents' fault because of this, this, and this. Already that was working on him.
Hmm.
But for me personally, because I had to feed us and clean and get him to school and all this, and just a little kid myself, and do the same, or there would be hell to pay. I learned very on that I am responsible.
What was the age difference between you and him?
Just under 2 years.
Wow. And do you want to say what happened? What your childhood was like?
I don't want to be disrespectful of my mother, who's still alive. It was very hard for her. She went to private schools in Europe, and anybody who looks into those things knows what happens in those schools and how people get broken and conditioned. And she came out of there broken, and then her own family went to war with her over her inheritance and estate. And numerous times had her declared mentally incompetent. And at a certain point, it broke her.
Right.
Right. So I don't, even when I was young and all, when the schooling days stuff was all long past for her, but my mother's quite young when she had me, about 20. I mean, young in modern sense, right?
Mm.
So the school day stuff and all that was done, but the estate battle was still going on. I was there as a kid. I watched it, and so I knew she was going through horrible things. I watched it change her. And what do little boys do with their mothers? They want to love their mother. They want to help their mother. They want to protect their mother. It's like the deepest instinct in a healthy young boy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm slightly frivolous, right? But it amplifies your point. So I think I've told you my wife, and by the way, those who are watching, this is going to be a deeply personal conversation on both our parts, right? Ian and I have already decided we're going to do it this way, and hopefully people watching can find themselves in what we're saying and as we share our own stories. So my wife is Christian. My father was Shia Muslim. My mother was Sunni Muslim. They were both miserable together.
Mm.
And my wife and I went to Quaker meetings for 10 years. And actually that was in response to my firstborn dying after 5 weeks. He was born from sperm and then he died. Just had severe brain damage. And so I started going to Quaker meetings. And then a couple of years ago, I may have mentioned this in previous videos, my son, out of the blue, decides to become a Sufi Muslim. A devout Sufi. I'm like, great. good. It's good for a young man to have a moral code to live by.
Yeah.
He sent his mum this little Instagram clip, and it's this sonorous, deep Arab voice. In Islam, honor your mother, and then honor your mother, and then honor your mother, and then as an aside, then honor your father. So it just backs up what you say, right?
Yeah.
Mothers are the source of life.
Healthy ones. Mothers are also, unfortunately, across millions of years of, living in the real world until this abnormality of the last century or so, also conditioned to sacrifice their children for the tribe.
Yeah, no, that goes on. But what I mean
conflict
is they give life. And then what you pointed to with regards to what happened to your mum in private school, and I assume happened to you, and it's something that I deal with all the time as a social worker, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to home educate, is it messes up attachment. Attachment gets messed up.
Yeah, so two things. One, I fortunately never went through that experience, the one that we're referencing, okay?
Private school, right?
Yeah, well, I went to private schools, but I never went through that because I would fight. I would fight from the time I was a little kid, and like a cornered badger. So, and that moved me around to schools, right? Because I wasn't fit for that school or that school. That stuff does break people. I mean, Alex has talked about this in a couple of shows with different people. I don't know if it's been with you about this old conditioning in the British, European aristocratic systems, and it's real. The problem is it happens at lower levels too. It's not just the upper middle class and the lower upper class that it happens to. It's happening all over the place.
Yeah,
and I know that it happened to my younger brother. And that's part of what took him to drugs. And I called it out. And I told my mother. And I got beaten unconscious for it.
Wow. How old were you?
7 or 8.
Yeah. Okay. That would do. The attachment phase in human beings is 0 to 7. And
yeah, well, there's another piece there as well that you probably know because this is your profession, but there is oxytocin deficits in certain genetic lines, passes mother to mother, mother to daughter to daughter to daughter. And there are some families that just, the women have oxytocin deficits. They don't bond well. I think it's an evolutionary thing. I think it tends to be in family. We see it in special operations, not just, but, across all of the Five Eye kind of world, we see the same thing in the special operations guys. A whole lot of them have horrible relationships with their mothers.
Yeah.
It's a known thing. And, if you look at talk to them and you do some neuroscience and hormone studies, et cetera, you realize, that was a mother that had an oxytocin deficit. They just didn't physiologically, neurologically bond with their child. Why? Well, because they come from a warrior lineage, and there's a much higher chance that their child's going to die in a combat.
Right. That I didn't know. What I do know, which I can add to what you're saying, is oxytocin is the attachment hormone.
Yeah. Well, it binds. So it's an interesting thing we've been doing with the brains, helping guys recover from brain injury, is that in females, just oxytocin itself works extraordinarily well. Women that have attachment issues, women that have had their own oxytocin mother-daughter deficits when they were young. Excuse me. What we're finding in males is that the oxytocin on its own doesn't always work so well. But if it's bound with prolactin, it works better. It's more bioavailable for males. And we suspect it's because males don't really produce much of it. We get most of it from the mother initially, and then the bonding's there. And there's some pickup through when you have a wife and they have a child. It's, so there's stimulation of production of hormones in our cells. But we're finding in males, whole raw milk, unpasteurized whole raw milk, which has the bound prolactin and the oxytocin together, does extraordinarily well. Well, what have they been trying to make illegal, harder than everything else?
I think, was it Rockefeller who did that in the US? By the way, I get raw milk, but I use it to make raw milk kefir. I drink a little bit of raw milk, but I
No,
mean,
it still works because as long as you're not hard pasteurizing it that breaks down the molecules, the bonds of the proteins, then you're still getting it in your kefir.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. I really like kefir as well.
Well, got to do the A2 because we're more genetically designed to digest A2 versus the A1 A2 that you get most. But
yeah, well, I get what I get. I don't know if it's that, if my local farm knows even, right? Now, so then, do you want to share some of the experiences you had as a kid? And then we can go on to how you think it shaped you, how you've dealt with them.
It was rough. We went from absolute comfort to absolute dire poverty, living in a shack up in the mountains and going without food some days. We had no floor, no electricity, no running water. It snowed a lot and it was very cold in the winter. One of the most common things I remember from my childhood is being cold. And the crazy thing is I'm almost 60 now and I love the cold. So, in fact, I seek out and prefer the cold. It was a rough time. We had to provide for ourselves. It's the way that a lot of people in the world live today. So I'm not whining or crying or anything. In fact, it made me extraordinarily tough, and it made SEER school later in Special Forces rather easy.
SEER school? What's that?
Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. It's the POW training school. Even getting smacked around in the camp was like, whatever, dude. My mother hits harder. My mother hit harder than you. Yeah,
you and I, in some respects, are at opposite ends of the scale, right? I'm a bloody social worker in a women's profession, taking care of little babies, right? And you're this. You spent some time I'm going to put it this way, right? As a trained assassin, and here we are.
We all got to work with our child trauma at one point in some way.
That's right.
Right? Didn't M and Bond say that the orphans always make the best ones? Right? About James. Yeah, no, it was about 8 years. It was very rough. I was in and out of care, state care.
Care homes or
my mother
placements?
I'm sorry?
Foster placements or care
foster homes? Yeah, foster homes. Those weren't with a couple exceptions, those were horrible. Foster homes are horrible. Usually they're uber religious people. And this is back in the 70s into the early 80s. My experiences with those families was absolutely predominantly horrible. All Christian families.
Right.
And I'm not, attacking Christianity for that because, whatever. But they were all uber Christian families and they were horrible. In and out of care. And then when I was 14, they finally took me for good because I had told her she wasn't going to beat me for the first time. I had reached 6 foot tall and said no. And the next day she said, take him or I'll kill him. And they took me. My brother stayed. I tried to get him out. Had options to do that. He chose not to. And ended up dead. So I don't blame my mother for anything. I haven't been angry or upset at my mother since I was young. I understood, right? I also understood I had to get out of there.
Yeah.
And I stayed as long as I did and put up with things as long as I did because I felt responsible for my little brother. And I think a lot of people do that in a lot of places in life at a lot of ages. They stick around in something that's really unhealthy because there's some other individual in that relationship that they feel obligations to. And I think in many ways, that's what we're doing with society right now. As a whole, we're all sticking around in this abusive thing because we've got people in it that we care about that can't see their way out yet.
That's very good. I've never thought of it that way. I mean, I do my analysis through fractal, but it is, I do come across older siblings who will stay around to be protective over their younger siblings, to warn them. So it might be, I can see how you and I on a larger scale are doing the same thing, warning others.
Yeah. Yeah. That the impetus for the conversation is exactly, and I appreciate you taking it on. And what happened, what I went through as a child, it cost my older brother, my younger brother, their lives before either one was, younger was before he was 21, the older one before he was 25. he went down a different path. He was adopted at birth by another member of the family, great grandparent, very well off. He inherited a bunch of money, too young, and drug himself to death because he didn't have any connection, no bond, and quite honestly, the families. My great grandmother was a later marriage of my great grandfather, much later, so she wasn't genetic heritage, but there's a pretty serious oxytocin deficit in the matrilineal line of my family that goes back a very long ways, and it's the way in a lot of these matriarchal families, by the way. A lot of these wealthy, upper crust, upper middle class, upper crust people. A lot of it, you'll see a lot of it. You look closely, but society is going through all of that. The elites are all dealing with chaos, and they're all at war with one another constantly. They're all trying to screw each other out of estates and wealth, or trying to defend against on the other side. And humanity's caught up in all of that. They're all stuck in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to say something, because if you and I were sitting across the table chatting, we could both be silent for a while. It just doesn't work really well on a video recording. Yeah. Some people are going to listen to this on Podbean, right? They'll be like, what's happened? Oh, man. When you were talking there, I was just thinking about how the elites, the oligarchs, are competing over the wealth of nations.
But it's all family to them.
No, I get it. But it's the fractal model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But their internal conflicts and struggles play out across maybe in their family, if they're upper middle class, maybe 10,000 to 100,000 people, employees at different companies and different things. Lower upper class, billionaire, I guess, upper middle class and upper class are bigger numbers today than when I was younger, right? I remember when the Force 400 was down in like 400 million, and now it's in the tens of billions, right? But, if you look at the upper middle class, the lower upper class, the upper class, it's just a scaling of how many millions of, hundreds of thousands to millions of people are impacted by their internal family struggles and conflicts and battles and, and dealing with all of this kind of complex familial stuff that goes on.
Like Susan Kukinder from Promethean Action, I don't know if you're familiar with them, they posted it a few days ago, and she was talking about how, in her analysis, Donald Trump is taking on the royal families of Europe.
Yes.
Drawing connections between the Norwegian and the Dutch and the British royal family and the German royal families.
But I disagree with her in this, because those families haven't had any power for 400 years. They've been owned by the financialists, by the Praetorians. They don't have any real power. So they are the face, though.
So wait a minute, even the Crown, which owns something like 20% of Canada?
No power. Their security could snuff out any single one of the family any day, and I suspect that's actually why Diana was killed, as a threat. Stay in line. They're owned.
Yeah.
Right?
Jimmy Savile was MI5 operation.
All of it. When they were put in, and this goes to the abuse, the structured, organized abuse that happens in private schools, all the way up, by the way, to advanced schools, right? It's this conditioning, breakdown and condition the upper class. What was put in the 1600s was a complete and total takeover of the royal houses and the destruction of the noble houses that could have gotten away over, the last 400 years. And these families are owned and controlled. Why? Because they have the last solid title to the lands and the assets of the lands that the financialists want to use for their systems, for their banking and financialist systems. You have to have somebody that has legitimate title, but you have to own and control every minute of their life.
Right.
And every once in a while, you got to kill some of them.
Jeez. Yes.
Or outright abuse them in horrible ways that they can never say anything about.
Okay, so I can see how King Charles could be at the effect of that. He, through control by Savile, parroting the WF line. But Queen Elizabeth,
Yeah.
how was she different? Or how did she resist all this, if she did at all?
What happened to the empire under her? It was all parsed off, all handed off to the financialist. All of the title to the royal lands, most of the title to the royal lands were partitioned off. What's happened under Queen Elizabeth, but it started under her father and her grandfather. And I suspect this is why Edward VII didn't want any part of it and just bailed out, is that title to the crown lands of the British Empire was steadily parceled off in these independence movements. Title was transferred. Was the title transferred to those lands? Or was it maybe, or was it held as collateral for the debts that those former colonies took on? Who actually owns the title now? Is it the crown?
We don't know.
We don't know.
No.
And now they want to take the crowns down because there's no real value to them anymore, and they're an expensive, subterfuge to maintain. And you need somebody to blame for the collapse of the current system.
Okay. And then one of the things Tom Luongo says is about how Prince William is a sovereigntist. Now, I've never really quizzed Tom about a lot of what Tom says, and you and Alex and Harley and Susan I listen to. I don't necessarily agree with or discount. I'm going to see how it plays out. I'm interested and I'll learn. But I think that's a view that you also hold as well about Prince William as a sovereigntist.
I think the reason Harry had a fit and got himself booted out of the house is because he's a staunch sovereigntist and realized that they have no power. At some point, he had the sit-down conversation. Probably threats. Somebody probably told him about who killed his mother and why.
That's interesting.
And he said, fuck this, I'm out of here. And how do you do that? Well, like there was this guy back several centuries ago named King George III. He acted crazy. Non compos mentis. What's Trump doing?
Yeah. Yep.
So something I realized, again, I have no animus whatsoever, no trauma, burden, none of that stuff from my childhood. My mother went through it before me. Others have gone, her grandma, it's just what happens in these families, these old houses. I get it now. If you can't survive that, you shouldn't have any control over the assets of the family. So with respect to, so this is why these families are horrible with one another. And most of them don't know that consciously, but some do. I've heard it openly spoken. Yeah. Right? If you can't take power from me, you shouldn't have it. If you can't survive what I'm throwing at you, you shouldn't have power.
I work a lot with families. I don't see these struggles because the families that I work with, they're the poorest of the poor. They're really distressed. They don't have those resources to fight over.
Yeah.
But I do see the generational trauma being passed down. And a lot of it is dad hits mum because granddad hit grandmother because great-granddad hit great-grandmother. And
goes
so on
both ways, by the way. There's women abuse men just as much, in fact, a little bit more physically than et cetera. So I want to be careful there, and I want to put this all on women, but let's not make women out to be blameless in all of this.
No, absolutely. I've dealt.
I didn't have a father growing up.
No, Ian, thank you. It's a good point. I've dealt with women who are perpetrators of domestic abuse, which goes on to one of the things that you've talked about estrogens and how they do it through manipulation and control and coercion, whereas men, we can do it through brute strength.
Yeah, if we're physical enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I want to get to what you just articulated there, because I think this is actually important. Remember what I articulated about the internal struggles of a family impact X numbers of people. The people you are working with are the ones that are experiencing that. And most of the reason these people have multi-generational traumas because they haven't been able to break multi-general locking into this social milieu. I don't want to say poverty, et cetera, because we found it, you get people out of poverty, it doesn't necessarily change. But, Theodore Dalrymple, I'm sure you're quite familiar with, wrote that book called Life at the Bottom. And what he articulated is that the lower classes is a mindset. It's a cultural neuroemotive framework. Well, why did that neuroemotive cultural framework exist? Because that social class is dealing with trauma, is dealing with abuse. From what? Well, yes, they perpetuate it internally and they got their own issues, but they're dealing with the abuse that's coming from the upper classes.
Yeah. Just like you and your brother growing up, you and your brothers growing up as little boys are dealing with abuse that's happening several levels up within your
Correct. And going back generations, not even current, right? And it's not necessarily, and this is another thing that I hear, so-and-so does. And by the way, my adopted father, original stock American, going back to 1650s family, he's a master's of so they were my foster parents, my last ones, private foster care. They adopted me. I was a teenager, and that doesn't happen, but they adopted me. And he went back to college, went to Syracuse, got his master's in child welfare, and went into child welfare for almost 40 years.
Wow.
And he did that because he was trying to figure out what the hell had been going on with me. And I was pretty okay, actually, but, when I was in this private foster care program, they would engage with other kids and families, and he'd see all this trauma stuff. And I had my own attachment issues, as you touched on earlier, right? That was my big attachment issues. But he went into the work for, almost 40 years. He still does it as a consultant, where he provides thought leadership, et cetera. So, again, though, what I was saying, so I've seen this argument that, dad hits mom because of, no, I don't think so. I think dad hits mom because dad's stressed out of his frickin' mind.
Sure. But there's a propensity to go that way because of the way that person's been reared. It's not, and because of something you said where they don't break the line. Well, that does happen.
I don't disagree with that. So, epigenetic trauma and epigenetic memory is a very real thing, right? Women aren't also blameless in this either.
Not at all.
And they can
I agree with you.
Real abusive, painful things that is like, what is my, so again, man should never hit a woman, mostly. There are some times when a man needs to maybe not kill her, not knock her out, all that, but I never hit my mother. But there was one time I told her no. And the next day she said, get rid of him or I'll kill him. Because she realized at some point when she came at me, I was physical enough now, big enough that I was probably going to react, even if I didn't want to, just instinctively.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if she went after my kid brother.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I'm not, my mother's pain was my mother's pain. She's almost 80 years old. She's still dealing with all of that. Right. So my thought is this. People want me to be upset at somebody else because of something they said or did. I'm like, I only got to put up with that person for like 3 minutes. They got to live with themselves every minute of the day. That's worse than anything I could say or do to them. Right?
Yeah.
But point I'm trying to get at is this, is that, and maybe not quite very well, is that upper class families, upper middle class families are dealing with a whole lot of internal struggles and pain. And people need to realize, I've been out amongst poor families. I've been out amongst very wealthy families. The families that treat each other the worst, that have the darkest freaking secrets, ain't the poor families. Now, that's true in some cases.
Mm.
But the ones that have got the just like horrible, unreal stuff that happens for decades or ever, it's the upper middle class and the upper class. Well, these are the oligarchs. These are, your high-level managerial peoples.
Well, they're feuding over spoils, I assume.
Well, usually internally, though, into their own family or the families associated with, et cetera. But it turns out it's rarely over spoils. It's
the wealth that the family has access to.
But it's not the wealth. It's usually power and credibility and influence.
Right.
The money is usually secure because it's in structures and multi-tiered structures, and there's administrators for that, and et cetera. And the families that don't do that don't stick around very long. They're usually gone second generation out, if not sooner. Right. But the families that are that have real wealth and assets, those are pretty much out of control of anybody in the family. I mean, it would take something pretty serious. So it's not about that. And that's all done and has to be done that way. Honestly, the problems that they have is, you did this and you did that and you said this and you said that. It's influence and it's relationships and it's abuse and it's just human beings being human beings, but with a lot more resources and a lot more assets and a lot more ability to be really pissed off and mean about it.
Okay.
And then that just trickles down to all of the right.
Yeah, that makes complete sense because as you're talking, I'm thinking of Parliament, where the struggle really is for influence and the direction that body will go in. And I imagine it's the same in all other bodies, and including these rich families that you're talking about. Which direction are we going? Or was it King Fahad was killed by his nephew? So you have royal families feuding to determine which direction they're going to go in.
Well, and you have families, going back to the earlier comment, I don't know a single upper crust family anywhere in the West that isn't owned by their security. And that security was created, if not earlier, back to the 1600s for the royal houses and the noble houses. For all the oligarchic families, that's all been put in place since World War II. You can't get a job as a head of security for a family if you don't come from a very small number of organizations. And you don't get recommended to that job and you don't pass, very rigorous backgrounds. Our elites are owned and controlled.
This would be
and all kinds of trouble and conflicts and stuff that happens in their families fueled by the people who own them to keep them in check and control, to keep them in a constant state of anger and fear.
Okay. Now,
and then shape that, right? And then
when you say that, all I can think of are like the security guards or whatever, and the butlers, but there's more to it than that, I suspect.
Oh, it's the guys in the suits with the guns, or it's intelligence assets.
The Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, well, it's the Praetorian Guard. That's exactly right. What's happened since the 1600s is the steady emplacement of the Praetorian Guard, the steady takeover. I now call them the Devil's Legions because I think it's more appropriate, right? Because the last 25 years, they've added all the terrorist organizations of the world, or virtually all of them, under their command and control, and now they're using them to overthrow nations. You think they don't use them to threaten people's, wealthy people's families?
And then who controls them would be the
financialists. Who want control of these families because they want these families to do these things to extract as much as they can from the people and from the assets of the land, so they can maximize their profits, their, that they siphon off, so that they can increase the valuations of the assets and properties until they're ready to collapse it all, because it's just not functional anymore. It's such a mess, and you've taken so much out of it and not reinvested, it doesn't really function anymore. Or even more scary for them, you start getting a number of families that figure out how to subtly make sure that their security teams and their intelligence teams are their own and secure enough of the core of the family, and then figure out how to work maybe over several generations to get their assets in such structures that they can't be seized. And then they start to work against the Praetorians. Because, by the way, that happened, again, in Rome. That's how the Praetorians were ended. They didn't just go away. They were drawn out and they were defeated in a battle. That took over a century to prepare. I think that's what's been happening with the assassination of the Kennedys, is the oligarchs realize we have got to defeat this thing.
Okay. And because as you're talking, I'm thinking about Donald Trump, because he has his own security detail.
Yeah, that pluses up the Secret Service.
Yeah. Okay.
And they still almost got to it.
Yeah.
Twice.
But the Praetorians, why can't the Praetorians turn on the financialists?
They're psychopaths. The Praetorians want the paycheck. So here's the thing people need to understand. The book I wrote, The Eternal War, a lot of these people are abused. Back to the beginning of this conversation, a lot of these people are abused when they were young, and they never dealt with that trauma. They turned it to wrath and rage. Right? There are certain organizations in our intelligence world, and even our law enforcement worlds and our special operations, that select for psychopathy, violent psychopathy.
Jeez.
And then it channels it.
And then one of the mistakes that I make, which is I think all human beings make is assuming, like already always naturally assuming that other people think like me. Like how
Yeah.
can the police officer just stomp on, arresting old women for holding, grannies for holding I support Palestine action signs. How can they do that? 'Cause I wouldn't do that. But then I'm not a social worker because I'm
So most,
psychopathic.
yeah, well, most of those aren't psychopathic. They're sociopaths with pretty serious trauma. And this is actually, you are a social work, so I don't know if you came across this, but there was work done, psychology work, pretty good psychology work done in the 70s and 80s on the propensity of people who were bullied to go into law enforcement because they can wear a gun and a badge and bully others.
Yeah.
Now it's almost out of control,
Yeah.
right? Because you have a lot of those, or a good number of those people now on the resentful side, as I say in the book, The Eternal War, they go in and become prosecutors and judges. And here in the United States, district attorneys. They just want to hurt people. So they go into where if I want to hurt people and I want to get away with it, and I want to do it legally, what do I do?
And then within social work, people become social workers because they want to rescue people because no one was there to rescue them from their own trauma.
But you also get people in social work who want to hurt people, and you get people as teachers who want to hurt kids because they hate kids, and right. So it's this constant. I think one of the things to take away from this conversation is that people need to we as a people need to realize that people at every level of society are dealing with some pretty seriously fucked up shit, either in the past or current, and for various reasons, mostly because it's not your business or because if anybody finds out, it's going to destroy me out there in the world. So most of us don't know. And then at the top in the highest levels, and then in some of the managerial levels and support levels where people are involved in some things, they can't say anything. They'll be dead. The kid will get killed in a car accident.
Yeah.
Right? Murder, people need to understand. We have all these nice things. What still drives the world is murder. What still controls the world is murder right here at home, in our halls, our families, our communities at every level. And the ones that are in the worst danger of murder aren't the poor people in the poor communities with crime. It's the upper class families. Heaven forbid one of them should ever turn against the system or the regime. How many Kennedys were killed? And oh, by the way, that other one was probably blackmailed. He probably wasn't driving that car when it went into the river in Chappaquiddick.
Okay. Then how come you didn't end up as a psychopath or a sociopath? Unless you are one, Ian.
No,
on the videos.
I've wondered this question. I had a psychologist girlfriend once upon a time. She's like, according, I think it was the DSM-4 at the time or DSM-5. She's like, according to this, you should be a psychopath. You got all the little buttons. No, I just so first off, they say, psychopathy is born, sociopathy is made. I don't think that's, I think with some exceptions, somebody can be driven to sociopathic-like behaviors. But I just genuinely, back to the eternal war and resentfuls, I just really suspect that a large number of these people are born this way.
Okay.
And we used to weed them out, by bullying or just killing them when they were younger because, that's the way somebody was a predator in our community, somebody would just kill them.
Yeah.
And after, we did away with all of that and we vilify anybody who does that and puts the good guy in jail now. And so at a certain point, you wind up with a disproportionate number of psychopaths and sociopaths who've been that way since they're born. And by the way, you can see it in little kids, 2-3 years of age behavior. You can start seeing it in the way they treat and interact with other kids. You really start to see it, up towards, as you mentioned earlier, about the age of 7. You can see it.
Okay.
And unfortunately, because of our modern, nanny state and our touchy-feely modern world where we don't believe that murder and malevolence are real and that it's still driving most everything, you wind up with a disproportionate number of these people in positions where they can do real harm. Now, back to your question, why don't they just turn on? Because they're fucking psychopathic and sociopaths and their brains don't work well. They don't, how does that brain work? It's not capable of sustaining structures and systems and internal balance and all of that. It can't. So it doesn't want to own or control the system. It just wants to continue to be paid well or comfortably, whatever that means for them, so they can continue to do their predation.
Okay, I'm going to add something to you as a mix. You're now a mix.
Yeah.
I'm going to add something. One is, listening to you, I'm thinking, you're not that different from me. Ultimately, we're all human beings, right?
Yeah.
Stuff happened to us as kids, and then we're working to somehow stop that from happening to others, which would suggest a certain degree of empathy and compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're younger, it gets weaponized against us.
How do you mean?
I went on and married my mother.
Right. Right.
I thought I could, right? I thought I was an adult and I was mature and I could help this person. And no disrespect to her, right? She gave me an amazing daughter, and she, in her own way, forced me through some very painful years to become a strong, capable man. I'm grateful. Genuinely grateful. Right? So where you and I might differ a little bit, and one, I think it's because of profession, I realized fairly early, well, I wouldn't say fairly early on, I was probably in my mid-30s when I finally realized that I can't help anybody out of nothing. The only thing I can do is help them see, and then maybe give them some tools so they can help themselves out of it. Now, you work in a profession where you're making choices about pulling people out or, so that's different. Right? It's part of the reason why I went into to be a Green Beret. We're teachers. Now, what do we teach? We teach the 7 elements of power and how do you exercise those in this complex environment. And yeah, we've got to shoot some people here and there, and and that's part of it too. It's training. How do we help you become self-sufficient? It's why I wanted to become a Green Beret. It's how do you teach a people? Right? It's like somebody's in an abusive situation. Do you go, in like it's been in some movies and things, right, where like there's a fight going on and somebody's being abused, and strong, capable person standing there, a man normally, right, and he could go in and break it up, pull a kid out, but the kid wouldn't learn how to defend himself, so he puts something on the ground, a weapon or something, and points him to it, and make sure nobody goes pick it up. And it's a test of manhood. Will you, and it isn't just for men, right? Because women go through this in their own ways, but it's, will you pick up what is being provided to you so that you can defend yourself and get yourself out of here? And a whole lot of us need to be doing that right now, because we need to stop waiting for somebody, one of these oligarchs. Families are going through their own internal struggles and their own threats and their own dangers, and they've got their own security could kill them at any minute. We need to stop waiting for them to wade into the fight and save us. They're throwing out things that they can here and there and keeping the fight from burning us down the best that they can. But we need to take a step, we need to take responsibility for our own trauma and our own bullshit and our own pain. And we need to get our way out. We need to fight our way out. And oh, by the way, what does that do? That takes some of the burden off of them so that they can better fight at their level.
Yeah, because the alternative doesn't bear thinking about.
Well, then we just replace one slave master with, we allow the few good ones, right? As James Billingpole says, one of the few goodies, right? We let the few goodies get overwhelmed and destroyed. And then when we wind up with a more abusive system than we had before. It just might, had 3 better channels on Netflix. And come with legalized cocaine. Who knows?
Yeah.
Right, because that's what they do. How do they keep the slaves fighting amongst themselves? How do they, so you got to keep the trauma load going. How do you keep the trauma load going on the bottom 50? You got to keep it at the top 5. And that's a whole different kind of fight and a whole different level of conflict and, abuse and everything else. You got to keep that all going. And then, when the bottom 50 becomes 60, 70, because most all the assets have been stripped out and all of the upward mobility is gone, you get the drugs on the opioids, right? The opiates. You don't want to use religion anymore, though, because they can organize around that. So you get them all this other stuff, right? And so what, now we're basically legalized prostitution with OnlyFans and all this other stuff and marijuana and all this. Then quite literally, the next steps is outright legal prostitution, which they're talking about openly, and legalized cocaine.
Well, legalized prostitution is this kind of like the leading towards it is the way this Bonnie Blue is being
It's
promoted.
exactly right. And that's also being used. I have no doubt she's being funded to try, feed her own trauma, so that it incentivized young males, foreign young males, to rape English women because they're lascivious. Old fancy $5 word.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that's not a psychological operation being run, her and this other one.
Yeah, no, that sickens me, and I can get it. Having been in Pakistan, never been to Afghanistan, but having some idea of the culture there, because in Northwest Frontier Province, it's the Pashtun,
Waziristan,
Khans, people where they don't have. I mean, I grew up here I've been here since I was 5, so I'm fully inculcated in the conversation that there is here. But in those places where it's like, no, it's they do think of Western women as loose and immoral because they go around dressed, they're not wearing burqas and stuff.
Well, it's less about the dress, because, at certain periods of time, women could dress that way too. It's about the behavior.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not all women.
It's how they justify their behavior.
Yeah.
And that cultural
and it's women being funded and backed and supported to participate willingly in their own trauma and their own abuse. And it's being done specifically by resentful powers and matriarchs in particular, who are locked in genetic warfare. Sure don't want some poor girl to have a 180 IQ son or daughter, generally a son, who rises up in the systems and becomes a disruptor to that matriarch's family in some industry or some power structure. So better keep those random genetics from happening.
Which also, on a fractal scale, larger scale, has me thinking about the trans agenda.
Oh, absolutely.
That's another war against women.
Yes.
And it fucks people up.
Yeah, well, and they need the violence, because what they found is they found that if you do all of these movies and all these ideas that a woman who weighs $105, if you know that term, right, 105 pounds, right, that a woman who weighs $105 can take down a highly trained 230-pound dude. It's like, lady, unless you're highly trained, I know 105-pound boys that'll take you down pretty easy. The physicality is that much different. So they pumped all this stuff about women being all these badass fighters and all this other kind of stuff. And then they put them in war, put them in conflict. Turns out, no, you can't beat the men that way. So, and males, testosterone, naturally, with some exceptions, and guys that got brain injuries or guys that are just, don't have neuroemotive regulatory capability deficit, they have neuroemotive deficits from the time they're little, right? The marshmallow test, right? You're always going to deal with those. But for the most part, males downregulate and calm shit down. It's like, I don't want to fight because I don't know if I can take that guy. And I can probably take that guy, but that's going to hurt. And I can take that guy, but then everybody's going to turn on me because he's a little shit, right? So it's like, I'm going to calm everything down. Well, you pump XY chromosome people full of estrogen. Now you got male physicality willing to do violence because it doesn't have the necessary testosterone to downregulate that amount of estrogen in its body. It's the same thing with bodybuilders and people taking steroids. They're always on roid rage when they're off the roids, because what's happening? Their estrogen levels spike.
Right. And then I'm thinking about animal predators, leopards and lions. They don't want to get hurt.
No.
They don't want to get hurt. They want to stay safe.
No. Even bears, who are pretty badass, even bears will back away. Even bears will be careful, right? Unless they're really hungry or they feel right? Yeah, no. Predators, natural predators are very careful. Look at wolves in particular. Wolves are very careful. Lions, right? Apex predators are still very careful. Well, most men, again, we've always got men that are born who failed the marshmallow test, right? And then men that have brain injuries, so they have inhibitory neuron damage, which is predominantly what happens with brain injuries, whether it's toxins or physical, blow or shockwave. They have impulse control issues.
And impulse control is a function of attachment, because attachment grows the brain. And
Mhm.
the more
Interesting.
there's a book I recommend. I absolutely like, A General Theory of Love. It's a book about neuroscience, but it reads like poetry.
Mm.
And it is about how attachment grows the brain, and it's the conduit through which love travels. So we did certain things with our kids. We co-slept because I said to my wife, "Look, chimpanzees don't put their babies in another tree,
Yeah.
right?"
Yeah, we did the same with our daughter.
I
Yeah.
I baby
Calm, mellow, slept through the night,
didn't
all
wake
of
up
it.
crying because they're right next to mommy and daddy, and then we
Uh,
carried them in a sling until they were like 3 years old.
yeah,
The sling, right? And
yeah,
breastfed for about over 2 years each of
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah,
So all that, and then we kept them at home. I'm not giving my kids away to
yeah, yeah, yeah,
familiar
yeah,
strangers.
yeah, yeah,
Chimpanzees don't do that.
yeah, yeah. Or
So
gorillas.
all
I'm
that
more of
stuff.
a gorilla than a chimp.
Well, actually, there's something else, right? I think you write so well, and you speak so well, and for
Mm,
me, forgive me if this seems patronizing or rude or
mm,
belittling in any way, right? But the demographic that I work with as a social worker are really poor, distressed families. They're the ones
yeah,
that I end up playing. I mean, given the parts of the where I practice social work, I've practiced social work in really rich areas as well, right? But not so much.
mm.
But then how come, you write so well? From the little that I know of your career, you've done so well. You're a published author. I love having you on. But you had this fucked up childhood. What did you do to bridge that gap?
I So two pieces. One, the first almost 6 years of my life were not in this the battle of my mother with her own family got steadily worse over time, and she was steadily destroyed over time. So the first 5 6 years of my life were one lived in genuine luxury and
Right.
comfort, and had a nanny and all those things. And nannies are huge because they shelter and guide and provide a different kind of attachment, but a
You got a
certain kind of
constant
attachment.
caregiver. That's really important.
Yeah, and because of the family I do come from, there was always reading and education, and being erudite was always, even when my mother was in the worst of her years. And then there was an 8-year stretch of time, and then I was brought out of the family, and a couple of years later, I was put in another very good, family. So that has a lot to do with it. But the other part, just from time with my younger brother and my older brother and other people, the biggest lie that's fostered on humanity is that we're all bloody equal. We ain't.
Okay,
Some of us are just wired differently.
right.
Some of us are just wired for whatever reason. There's a small number of us, and we find them in special operations and in the harder, more dangerous roles, shall we say, that are just wired for a preternatural calm. No matter what was going on, I was always able to disconnect a little bit and just remain calm. Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Doesn't mean it wasn't, brutal. It doesn't mean that I wasn't dealing with pain, but that, you know, for whatever reason, from the time I was young, I've just always had a preternatural calm.
Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with the Gallup Strengthfinder test. Gallup Strength.
Yeah, I've heard, but I don't. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's about $50, maybe $75,
Mhm.
and it's based on a database of about 15 million people.
Well,
And their argument is that our talents are hardwired into our brain,
yeah,
are invisible to us.
yeah,
To do this test takes about half an hour, and then it says what your talents are. What we're really great at is invisible to us,
yeah.
because I take it for granted, and because the internal and external culture is all about fixing what's wrong with me. But if I think of Muhammad Ali and Elvis, they discovered their talents by accident. And then they say, discover what your natural talents are, and then reorganize your life and your
Around.
activities and everything so that you're maximizing. So Muhammad Ali should box
Mhm.
and Elvis should sing, not the other way
Yeah,
around. And one
yeah.
of the things that I discovered about myself, and just listening to you, is like, I really enjoy child protection social work, the rough end.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm great in an emergency because I keep calm. But I
yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the calm. What made Muhammad Ali so good in a fight? He was calm. Fist flying, guys trying to knock his head off with a single punch. He was calm. What made
And
Elvis so successful until it didn't because of the drugs and the stress was that with all the fame and all of the work that went into, he was calm. Look at younger Elvis and then different Elvis. They're very different people, and the drugs got involved and all that stuff, right?
yeah,
The
it is.
most
You know, when you say calm, it's that ability to not react, that impulse control.
I can step back a little bit, and the stepping back a little bit, going. So the way in which I survived the worst of my mother is I always disconnected. I disappeared into books mostly, and the horses, and I could get out in the countryside, and that's one of the beautiful things. And she was cool with that because she can calm down and, etc. But the people that I know that are preternaturally calm, they have this ability to disconnect without being a psychopath or a sociopath.
Yeah.
Right? They can take a step back, they can go into an internal place, and also not being an escapist, right? Because that's another form of danger and threat. But they can go into this internal place, like that's not happening to me. That's not touching me. Or even if it is happening to me, it's not happening to the real me. And the guys that you hear this from specifically are the guys that were POWs in World War II, in Vietnam, et cetera. And without exception, the guys that were able to get out of there sane and whole, even with years sometimes of horrible treatment, where they'll tell you without exception, they were able to go to an internal place, disconnect. It wasn't happening to them. They could let it play out, respond where they needed to, and then when it was over, come back.
Which reminds me of Putin, like how he plays.
Well, I'm going to say this so I see this also in Trump. And
Right.
everybody talks about he's this, and this. And the ones that I'm at a place now where I'm hearing an interview with somebody, and I might even agree with some of the stuff to say, the moment they say that Trump's just a narcissist, I turn it off. I'm done listening to anything they have to say. Right? He's operating in it, and I'm no apologist for Trump. I don't know the man, but nothing I see is narcissistic behavior. What I'm seeing is a guy operating in an impossible environment where 1,000 people are trying to convince us of who and what he is. And he's got to hold steady of, no, this is who I am. And oh, by the way, it's all over the place.
But
So you can't trap me there. Mm-hmm.
that reminds me of Muhammad Ali. His first fight against Tyson.
Yes.
Was it?
Not Tyson.
Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston.
Yeah.
Shame on me, right? But
Yeah.
the way he acted crazy in order to disarm Liston, who didn't know what he was dealing with.
So you can't pigeonhole me. So you can't put me in a position and think that you can figure me out. You want to know another one who did this well in the MMA world was Conor McGregor.
Interesting.
Same thing.
I've never
watched. A little bit more.
I've never watched Conor McGregor in MMA.
Oh, he's a great fighter, right? And until
I have
got hit in the head.
I have DM'd him, and I have sent him a message asking him to come on for an interview. Given what's happening in Ireland.
I mean, at a certain point, he'd been hit in the head enough, like any real fighter, that inhibitory neuron damage takes over, and now you've got impulse control stuff. But before that, he was at. Every once in a while, he would show you, same as Trump does. Every once in a while, show you, no, I'm still here. I'm still right here.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like Muhammad Ali did.
Yeah. So I think this is something that goes back to society, though, writ large, that we need to is we are going through a transition period that happens about every 400 years. Mm-hmm. And the oligarchs, the factions of the oligarchy, and there's three majors, and then, adjuncts of each of those, they're locked in all-out war, winner take all. And people are dying all over the place and getting destroyed all over the place. What's that?
They're at war with each other.
They're at war with each other. It's an all-out war, and the three factions are at all-out war. Now, the Marxist one is pretty much losing. Now it's between the fascist one, Nazi one, and the responsibles. They're at all-out war. And then you've got 3-4 other factions within each of those that are all jockeying for their piece, right? And they're dirty, and causing all kinds of problems. But the oligarchs are in all-out war right now. Unmitigated, no backing out. It is winner take all.
Okay.
And we need to accept that and take a step back and disconnect a little bit and not get emotionally attached to it. We need to remain a little calm.
impulse control. Now, I accept
Yes.
what you're saying out of my regard for you,
Yeah.
but what's the evidence for this? How do you know these oligarchs? What are their factions? Is it China, Russia versus the US?
No. That's not how the oligarchs don't break down by country. Oligarchs break down by neurological, ideological conceptualization. They cross borders. That's why they're trying to do away with the nation state. It's no longer valid to them. It's an expense. It's a ludicrous expense that's now dangerous and turned on them. Right? It's a pit bull that's become, it's bit the hand of the master one too many times. And now the master wants to put it down. No, these oligarchs, as I wrote about in the book, The Eternal War, they break down into three primary categories, then just subgroupings. It's your Marxist. These are people that want to burn everything to the ground so that they can build their, insane utopia.
WEF.
And that's really what it is. It's the world in which the insane rule.
Right. The WEF would be one.
Oh yeah, that's the Marxists, that's etc. The other one is, fascist, but really it's the Nazis, and they don't want to burn it all down. They want to control it all so they can bring about their techno-utopia, their control utopia.
European Union fits that model?
European Union is square in that. We got some of our oligarchs here in the US, we got some there in the UK, right? And then the third one is the responsibles, and they're only loosely a faction, but they are the humanists. They're the ones that aren't trying to control everything. They're the ones that realize you need the constructive destruction and chaos of humanity to make all this stuff possible. Because we keep trying the Marxist one and we keep trying the Nazi one, going back way before Marxists and Nazis, by the way, and they don't work. They don't work at the small scale and they don't work at the large scale. And so the responsibles really are only a faction in that they're in staunch opposition to these two resentful factions. And then there's subsets of each.
The responsibles, and I'm not saying that this is one, right, but could be represented by Russia, perhaps.
Correct. Right now, under its current, yes, China.
Right.
Now, not under Mao and not under Stalin and not under, the quote unquote Marxist, right? But currently, yes. And you want another one that's responsible, although it's got a lot of factional issues because of, a lot of outside influence is Persia. That's why we're going so hard against the Iranians.
And Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, perhaps?
And I'm going to back off from there. He's got all the trappings of and not just him, but the others that have joined, etc. Looks like I don't know enough about that one, so I'm not
saying these are, but looking for examples of them.
He looks all the signs of all of the things that they're doing for Burkina Faso, and now there's a group of 4 or 5 nations that will come together. That all looks like responsibles. Now the problem is that in the next iteration of the oligarch power structure, so some places the oligarch power structure turns over relatively quickly, 40, 50 years, maybe 80 to 100 years. In the English-speaking world and most of the Western European world, I don't know about Western Europe, I haven't really studied, but in the English-speaking world, which is now the whole Commonwealth and all the former major colonies, et cetera, it's every 400 years. Like clockwork. We go through this massive all-out oligarch fight where they put in place a new oligarchic system because one of those 3 factions won.
Right.
Well, the faction that won 400 years ago was the Nazis. But it can't be sustained anymore unless they go to a whole other level of totalitarian control. And I don't know, which they talk about. They openly talk about it, right? They're trying to roll it out there in the United Kingdom in different ways, in different places. I don't think it's going to work because while the Matrix movies were actually a psyop to get you to actually bow to the machine, right? There's all 3 Matrix movies about humanity, and in the end, what does he do? He bows to the machine. That's what the movies were all about. And then now, where are those 2 guys now? They're freaking trannies.
The script writers, yes.
Okay, so
Ian, please, dear God, the message to Joel and Ethan Cohen: don't do that. All right,
yeah,
his men, stay his men.
Yes, yeah. So, point being is that the Nazis won. The fascist total control guys won 400 years ago, and now they're at the full extent of that control, and it's all breaking down because those two resentful factions, the fascist Nazis and the Marxist communists, and whatever they were called before, Fabians or this or that, or who the hell cares, right? In today's world, we know them best as that. They're both extractive systems that put nothing back into the actual system and the people. And so neither one of them are actually sustainable beyond a certain point. At a certain point, there's no more to take. And there's no more lies you can tell that people will believe you and support what you're doing anymore. And for both of those, we're at that.
Okay, why 400 years? What is the deal?
I don't know what it is. In the English-speaking world, it's just happened about 400 years. What I think it is two parts, and I think they're related. One is I suspect it has something to do with the nature of the English language.
Okay.
And you can develop, and how literate the English-speaking peoples have been for a very long time. And this is something a king set in motion, by the way. 3 kings in a row, right? Alfred, Edward, Athelstan, and really started under Egbert, Alfred's grandfather, this push for literacy. So I suspect it has to do with the nature and the structure of the English language and the literacy rate amongst the English-speaking peoples. We're at a certain point where we've run through all the lies and all the scenario iterations of lies, and then we're able, with English, to go, shut the fuck up, that's a lie. And we're able to pick it up real quick no matter how they adapt it. So I suspect it has to do with the nature of English and lie detection. Something I also suspect it has something to do biophysiologically.
Like a certain number of generations, like a sort of half-life, a decay.
Yeah. And I think what it is the burnout in neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. I think the system, what it does is it's exhaustion. I think what happens is the control systems, right? The maintenance of the overhead of just living in this ever more complex society gets so exhausting that we just check out of it because we can't produce the norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in the levels necessary to keep our brains functioning at this highly complex level and live.
Okay, fascinating, mind-boggling, right? And I'm thinking of somebody sets up a business, a really great innovative business, and it flourishes, and then they pass it on to their kid.
Yeah, the rule of 4.
And the kid runs it, but it isn't usually it's not as successful because the same conversation, the same discourse, the same energy that created it is absent.
Yeah, or I want to give another piece. It's rarely that the energy is absent. That's sometimes. But probably 80%, mostly 80% of the time, it's that in order to sustain, because entropy is a very real thing, right? Everything in every scale from base physics all the way up is trying to go to the lowest energy levels possible, so the lowest homeostatic energy levels possible. So if you're building something great in a single generation, the next generation is going to have to do something half again or twice as great just to sustain what was built. So it's not, and what was built takes an immense amount of overhead to sustain. It's not like I build it, it's there, right? Good. No. As the first generation builds it, in this case, and 400 years is what? 4 long generations. 4 long, the lives of 4 people, right? 4 long-lived peoples, 400 years. Still the rule of 4, very much what you're saying. But point being is that, yes, you do have probably 20% that just don't have the capacity to sustain what was even built. But it's not about sustaining what's built, which is immensely complex. It's not as simple as when it was first started. Now it's a thing, and it's a complex thing that requires an immense amount of complexity to maintain. The problem is that in order for it to actually sustain, you have to keep growing it at a certain rate, which requires even more capabilities, even more leadership, even more guidance, even more capabilities. Well, over 3-4 generations, the ability to, and what they say is if the first generation adds to it and the second generation sustains, by the 4th generation, it should be stable. It's not always, of course, right? Because the 3rd generation come in and cock it up, seriously. But point being is that at a certain point, it becomes somewhat stable, but it's still always decaying. And to stop that rate of decay, you're going to have to put in more and more and more complexity across more and more and more domains to keep it going.
Or
after about,
actually not or, so I can see parallels with that with the fiat monetary system.
Correct.
That it grows and 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 grows, and then it becomes too unwieldy, unable to be sustained. So then what the oligarchs do is they try and pull it all in.
They collapse it.
Take power to themselves.
Yeah, well, they've already been doing that the whole time. Power's been naturally accumulating to them anyways. The problem is that the current system becomes so complex. This gets back to the brain burnout, right? Where you don't have enough people in your populace that can just sustain this complex thing anymore. I mean, look right now, nothing works, right? Try and work with customer service of any major corporation. If you can get to anything that even responds, that isn't some bot that just puts you in a circular freaking conversation. These are people who make revenues that are, need to care about the customer. Nothing works anymore. Why? Because it's just overly complex. It's not that the assets have accumulated to a small number of oligarchs. It's always been that way. It's just they're no more wealthy today than they've ever been proportionally.
And right? And then their solution is to simplify it by culling 3/4 of the population.
Well, that's the Marxist side of that's the Marxist faction. Give me a sec. And somewhat the Nazi, fascist faction, because they are ethno-oriented people. That might have a broader definition of ethno, but they're ethno-oriented people because they believe that you can't have a functioning system if you don't have it, a portfolio of related ethnicities at the core of it. Back to the conversation we're having, the problem that we have is across 400 years in the English-speaking world, we have a certain ramp up of complexity that seems to peak out about every 400 years. And we just can't go beyond. And everything that we do is based off of laws. So what is that? That's just all this complex legal structure. And the capital and money and revenues and all that's got to support it. It's right. The fiat doesn't run ahead of the structures. The structures are what grow and the fiat keeps up with that. And at some point, the laws themselves, the language itself that's necessary through all these contracts, all of the laws, all the adherence to the laws, all of this stuff just becomes so complex. Not even the smartest, most intelligent. This is why we have all these conversations. It just becomes so complex, it's not sustainable anymore. Now, what do the oligarchs tend to do? Well, they realize that's coming, and they go to war with each other because they have alternative strategies about what they replace it with. Some new level of complexity, some new complex system. In the book, The Eternal War, I call it artificial reality tunnels, right? It's the doctrinal line reality. They want to launch a new artificial reality tunnel. Well, I'm going to tell you the one that the borderline Nazi and responsibles factions, because these factions somewhat overlap each other, of course, right, is trying to do now. And it's in your name online. Cryptocurrency.
Yep.
That's the new transition, the new dramatic simplification into a new complex system that expand out. And I'll just use the example that can expand out to 19 decimal points of complexity. What is that 19 decimal points? Well, that's X to a number of, right? It just keeps going up. So it's X to the 19th. That's what that really equates to. So that's what they're trying to do because if they can't transition to another system that's simple-ish to understand, but immensely complex to begin with, and then it just goes from there for the next 400-year cycle of increasing complexity. These are called dissipative structures, by the way, in physics and chemistry. But if they can't do that, the structure in the system devolves in what's called a collapse. Now, collapses don't happen all of a sudden, it's gone, etc. When Charlemagne came into the city of Rome 300 years later, almost 400 years later, Rome was still there. Tens of thousands of people still lived and worked in Rome. There was still wealth. There was still nobles. There was still a senate, all of it. It just had pulled back to a degree of complexity collapse that it could sustain.
Okay, like the British Empire, it became too large, too burdensome.
Too complex.
Yeah, and then what you're talking about, I'm reminded of what you said at the beginning of this conversation early on about what was happening in your family.
Yes.
That it sounds like...
That was the end of empire.
Yeah,
what happened to my family was the end of empire.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like that at a fractal level, going down, going down.
No, very good. Very, very good. That's exactly what happened. What happened to my family was the end of empire and the contraction of the family's wealth and assets. And there wasn't much of the family left because, it's not like they were having 4 or 5 kids. And it devolved into a conflict between, the oligarchs of my family.
Which is happening in the Punjab, where land is being split up into smaller and smaller parcels
Yeah,
as families grow. And then that mechanism isn't sustainable anymore because, the farmland is so small now that it's not enough to sustain somebody's family.
So it's subsidized. That's subsidized by the outside, so that now they have a soldiery willing in armies or in terrorist organizations to go out and take lands.
Jeez, oh my gosh, the complexity.
Because in contract law, going back 1,000 years plus, in contract law, your title indeed has no value if you can't physically defend possession.
Well, in reality, you can't. If you can't physically defend possession, then who cares, right? That's just the deal.
So what do we do? Is what is a society in a community? It's a collection of our defense of our title and property rights. But when that all gets too much stolen or too apothecated, right? Well, somebody's got a title on it. Somebody's got a claim on a claim on a claim on a claim on a claim of a title, of an actual fundamental title, right? All these derivatives. And they're siphoning off, proceeds and, asset appreciation and all these structures and things that have nothing to do with the ones who actually own the title. At some point, there's nothing there to defend anymore. And it becomes, in terms of there's no reason for us to continue to defend all these other, add-on claims to the title. And at some point, it's like, I'll fight you for it.
And then if I lose, I lose the land.
If I lose, I lose, because contractually I've already lost it. There's no value coming back to me as the title owner at all. So I've already lost it. So I might as well fight you for it.
And okay, so then, and that goes on at a family level, and that's happening between.
That's why they're flooding all of the West with foreigners.
Between the Zionists and Gaza and Russia train over Donbass. I'm not arguing whether it's right or wrong. I'm just drawing parallels.
Well, the Donbass is a little bit different because when we did the Maidan coup to try and, put in place the government that would go to war with Russia, we backed and funded and supported the death of tens of thousands of people in the Donbass.
Yep.
Because they're ethnically Russian, and they said, no, we're not going to join the government, and we're not going to do this. So they started shelling them in 2014, and we backed all of that. That wasn't about a land grab. It was about a land grab, but of Russia.
Yes.
But what did Russia prove? Russia proved, we'll fight you for it.
Yeah, you ain't getting it.
We'll stand and fight for our lands.
Oh, because, Ian, what are we going to do, right? It's been absolutely fascinating, because I said you would go for an hour, and we'd been about an hour and a half or something, right? And we could carry on for hours and hours and hours and hours, and perhaps one day, over a coffee, or I'll have a sparkling water, right? You may have a bevy, I don't know, right? We shall continue this conversation, but it's just human beings being human at all levels.
Correct. And here's the thing we need to do so that we don't lose our own lands right now. So we need to realize that people at every level of society are hurting.
Yeah.
And the stress level, the tension level, the chaos level, the strife, it's everywhere at every level of society.
Yeah.
And we need to not turn on each other right now, because we need each other, because they are quite literally trying to take our lands and our assets.
And quite literally trying to kill us.
And quite literally trying to kill us to be able to because you can't have somebody who has actual original title claim to the land come back at some point when they can't fight you for it and make a claim on that title.
So we got to come together. Ian, thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate this. Everybody, please share and subscribe and pass this around and comment and like and do all that business. And by the way, if you're in the UK, or if you're in the European Union, or if you're anywhere, before it becomes illegal, get yourself a VPN.
Well, if I might, make sure it's from the right source, because it turns out half the VPNs are Israeli that people are using, right? So be sure that the source of your VPN is a good quality, and the best one's one of these open VPNs or something else.
Sentinel.co, decentralized open source.
There you go. There you go.
Ian, thank you so much. Thank you. Look forward to having you on again soon.
Of course, Rich.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Is this you? Low energy, low libido, no get up and go? Boost your testosterone naturally and rev up your engine with Immense Boost. bit.ly/CryptoRichBoost and order your testosterone boost today.